Chapter 3 Millbrook. Ash limped into Millbrook with one hand pressed tightly against the worst of the cuts on his shoulder. Blood had soaked through his sleeve and dried in dark, stiff patches down his arm. Every step sent a dull pulse of pain through his thigh where the goblin's knife had caught him. His breathing still came in short, careful pulls. His asthma had not fully settled from the fight, and the long walk into town had only made it worse. Health, 58 out of 120. The regeneration was slow, but it was working. The system kept him just stable enough that he was no longer actively bleeding out. 4 health an hour was not much, yet it was the only reason he was still on his feet instead of collapsed in a ditch somewhere along the road. People noticed him immediately. A woman carrying a basket of bread slowed as he passed, eyes widening at the blood. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it when Ash kept moving. A pair of men near a smithy stopped talking and stared openly. One of them took a half step forward before his companion muttered something and pulled him back. A child pointed until her mother quickly pulled her hand down and steered her away. More than one person stepped into his path with concerned or curious expressions, clearly intending to ask if he was all right or where he would come from. Ash did not stop. He kept his gaze fixed ahead and waved each of them off with a short, dismissive motion of his free hand. He had no energy for questions, and even less desire to explain that a cleric of murder had just nearly died to 3 goblins on the road outside of town. The less attention he drew, the better. In Fairhaven, attention had already cost him everything. He was not eager to repeat the experience here. The town itself looked ordinary at first glance. Wooden storefronts with painted signs, stone foundations, hanging placards for a bakery, a general store, a small clinic with a green leaf symbol above the door. The people wore the same slightly different style of clothing the farmer headed, thicker fabrics and subtle geometric stitching, and their accents carried the same broader vowels. Smoke drifted from chimneys in thin gray lines. Somewhere nearby, a hammer rang against metal in a steady, unhurried rhythm. A pair of dogs trotted past without interest. Laundry hung from lines strung between upper windows. And still that quiet, unplaceable unease sat in the back of Ash's mind, like a note played just slightly out of tune. The sunlight felt a fraction too warm. The shadows seemed a fraction too sharp. Nothing he could point to, nothing he could name, just a constant low awareness that something about this place was not entirely right. He ignored it as best he could and kept walking toward the center of town. The guild hall was impossible to miss. It rose above every other building like a dark tooth against the sky, a tall Gothic structure of dark brick and weathered stone. Pointed arches framed the narrow windows of colored glass. A steep roof of slate tiles seemed to claw upward. Carved stone figures of armored warriors and robed casters lined the upper walls, their faces worn smooth by years of wind and rain. A wide set of steps led up to a pair of heavy double doors bound in black iron. Above the entrance, a large crest had been worked into the stone, 2 crossed swords behind an open book, the mark of whatever adventurers' guild operated in this world. Ash stopped at the bottom of the steps for a long moment, catching his breath. The climb looked longer than it should have with his current health and stamina. His shoulder throbbed. His thigh threatened to buckle if he put too much weight on it. Health, 59 out of 120. Stamina, 41 out of 110. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, wiped a smear of dried blood from his cheek with the back of his wrist, and started up the stairs one careful step at a time. Each one cost him a little more than it should have. By the time he reached the top, his lungs were burning again, and black spots flickered at the edges of his vision. Whatever waited inside the guild hall would decide how his first day in this new world actually began. The heavy doors opened onto a wide, high-ceilinged hall that smelled of wood smoke, roasted meat, and spilled ale. Long tables of dark wood filled much of the floor space, many of them occupied. Adventurers in mixed armor and travel clothes sat in groups of 3, 4, or 5, talking loudly over one another, arguing over maps spread across the tables, or simply eating and drinking. Some were clearly forming parties, gesturing at one another, comparing weapons, laughing too hard at jokes that probably were not that funny. Others nursed drinks alone in the corners or leaned against the walls in quieter conversation. A large fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting shifting orange light across the room. Above the bar, A board covered in handwritten notices listed available contracts and party requests. Despite the blood still drying on Ash's clothes and the obvious limp in his step, no one paid him any real attention. A few glances came his way, lingered for a second on the dark stains, then slid off just as quickly. In a place like this, a wounded newcomer limping through the door was apparently not unusual enough to interrupt anyone's evening. That, more than anything else so far, told Ash something about the kind of world he had landed in. He limped across the stone floor toward the long registration counter at the far end of the hall. The journey felt longer than it should have. Conversations washed over him without sticking. Talk of dungeon clearances, monster bounties, which tavern had the better stew, who had lost a finger last week and still managed to finish the job. Normal adventure noise. Background static. A middle-aged clerk with neatly combed gray hair and a pair of half-moon glasses looked up as Ash approached. The man's eyes immediately flicked over the bloodstains, the way Ash favored one leg, and the tight set of his jaw. My, the clerk said, raising both eyebrows. His voice carried the same slight accent as the farmer's. What has happened to you? New in town? Ash stopped in front of the counter, breathing carefully through the lingering tightness in his chest. He kept his injured arm close to his side. Yes, he said. I've come from the World Gate. My world was already cleared. The clerk's expression shifted into something more professional, though a trace of sympathy remained in the lines around his eyes. He nodded once, as if he had heard the same story many times before. Well, you've come to the right place. He reached under the counter and pulled out a stack of forms along with a smooth, fist-sized crystal that glowed with a soft blue light. The crystal was similar to the assignment crystal back in Fairhaven, but smaller and clearer. He set both items on the polished wood between them with practiced efficiency. Go ahead, the clerk said, tapping the crystal lightly with one finger. Let's register your class. Before Ash could reply, a tall man in pristine white robes approached the counter from the side. His presence carried a quiet authority. Several nearby adventurers glanced over and immediately looked away. The man's hair was silver at the temples, and a simple golden emblem of a sunburst was embroidered on the chest of his robes. He studied Ash with calm, assessing eyes. I couldn't help but overhear, the man said. His voice was smooth and measured. You look as though you've already had a rough introduction to this world. May I ask what class you carry? And would you like healing? I can tell you need it. Ash hesitated, then nodded. You're right, I do need healing. What's your name? Massimo, the man replied. He stepped closer, examining the dried blood and the way Ash still favored his leg. You're in shock right now. I can heal you to full if you'll allow it. Ash knew he was in a bad state. He had never been this injured before, not even during the worst of his training runs back in Fairhaven. The lingering pain, the stiffness, the way every breath still caught in his chest, he could not afford to stay like this. Yes, he said, please. Massimo placed his palm gently against Ash's forehead. Soft white light bloomed beneath his hand. Healing palm. Warmth flooded through Ash's body in a single clean wave. The deep cut on his forearm sealed. The wound on his shoulder closed as if it had never existed. The slash on his thigh vanished. Even the tight, wheezing pressure in his lungs eased. His health, mana, and stamina bars climbed rapidly in the corner of his vision until they sat full once more. Health, 120 out of 120. Mana, 160 out of 160. Stamina, 110 out of 110. Ash exhaled slowly, almost dizzy with relief. Thank you, he said. Massimo lowered his hand and gave a small, satisfied nod. See? That's not so bad. Now go ahead and register. Ash turned back to the crystal. His hand still trembled as he reached for it. For a moment, the memory of the assignment crystal in Fairhaven rose sharp and clear. The crimson light, the magistrate's disgust, the word scum ringing through the hall only hours ago. The weight of it held him frozen. Then he forced himself to move. His palms settled against the cool surface of the crystal. Soft blue light flared, and text appeared above it for both Byron and Massimo to see. Ash Procell, class, Cleric of Murder, level 1, race human. The reaction was immediate. Massimo's face drained of color. His hand, still half raised from the healing, began to tremble. He took a sharp step back as if the crystal itself had become dangerous. "You're a cleric of murder?" he hissed, the words low and sharp with disbelief. Byron stared at the floating text for a full second longer than protocol required. Then his training reasserted itself. He reached for the registration slate with practiced speed, though his fingers were not quite steady. "The Empire will know of this right away," he said. The line was clearly one he had delivered many times before for rare or restricted classes, but the shock in his voice undercut the professionalism. Ash felt the weight of every nearby gaze beginning to turn toward the counter. Panic flared hot in his chest. "Yeah, I just received this class," he blurted. "It wasn't my idea, I swear." Conversations across the hall died in uneven waves. Adventurers at the nearest tables stopped mid-sentence. Tankards lowered. Chairs scraped as people shifted for a better view. Within moments, the entire guild hall had gone quiet enough that the crackle of the fireplace was the loudest sound in the room. A large man near the center tables set his tankard down with a heavy thunk. He was broad-shouldered, wearing reinforced leather and a scar that ran from temple to jaw. He pushed back his chair and walked over with the easy confidence of someone used to being listened to. Daniel stopped a few paces from the counter and looked between Ash, Massimo, and Byron. "Hey," he said, voice carrying easily in the sudden silence. "What's all the commotion for?" Byron cleared his throat, still staring at the crystal's lingering text. "This young man just registered. His class is uncommon." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer and read the floating words for himself. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then a slow, humorless smile pulled at one corner of his mouth. "Cleric of murder," he repeated. "Well, that's a first for Millbrook." Massimo's voice was tight. "It should not be allowed. Classes like that are restricted for a reason. The Empire will decide what to do with him," Byron cut in, though he still looked unsettled. "My duty is only to register what the crystal shows. The report is already being prepared." Ash kept his hands visible and his posture as non-threatening as he could manage. "I didn't choose it. The system gave it to me a few hours ago. I asked if I could change it. It said no." Daniel studied him for a long second, then glanced at Massimo. "You healed him anyway." "I healed an injured traveler," Massimo said stiffly. "I did not know what he was, and now you do." Daniel turned back to Ash. "You planning on using that class the way it sounds? Or are you just another unlucky bastard the system decided to mess with?" Ash met his eyes. "I don't want to kill anyone who doesn't deserve it. I just want to survive long enough to figure out what I'm supposed to do with this." Daniel grunted, neither approving nor condemning. "Fair enough answer for now." He looked at Byron. "He registered clean?" "Yes. The record is complete. The Empire will be notified." Massimo still had not relaxed. He stared at Ash with open distaste. "No one will let you join their party," he said coldly. "They won't trust someone with a despicable class like yours. Not here, not anywhere." Daniel's expression hardened. He nodded once in agreement. "He's right." His voice dropped, rough and final. "Get the fuck out of this hall. Maybe you can scrape by as a laborer in town, because there is no way anyone is joining a party with you. That class of yours is disgusting." He took a step closer, looming over Ash. "The Empire probably won't even bother coming for a level 1 like you, but you'll never clear a dungeon alone, and you'll never leave this planet." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Every eye in the guild hall remained fixed on Ash as the words settled over him like a second exile. Ash swallowed, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I was going to study here," he said, "to find out what adventurers are supposed to do and what the Empire actually wants from them. Could I at least do that?" Byron hesitated, glancing between Ash and Daniel. His professional mask cracked just enough to show discomfort. "Well, normally, yes. New registrants are allowed access to the basic training materials and the public records." He looked at Daniel, then back at Ash. "But Daniel is a high-level fighter. His word carries a lot of weight in this hall. He doesn't even run dungeons here anymore. He's an official trainer for the Empire." Daniel's scarred face remained unreadable, but the message was clear. Ash's provisional guild token suddenly felt even heavier in his hand. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Bard. The silence in the guild hall stretched until it became uncomfortable even for the people watching from the tables. Byron looked down at the registration slate, then at the bronze token still resting in Ash's hand. For a moment, the clerk's professional mask slipped. Something like regret crossed his face. He reached under the counter and pulled out a thin, folded pamphlet. The paper was cheap and slightly yellowed at the edges, the kind of thing printed in bulk for every new registrant. He held it out without meeting Ash's eyes for long. "I believe you're not a killer," Byron said quietly. "So here's the pamphlet we give all new registrations. Basic rules, how contracts work, what the Empire expects from ranked adventurers. Standard information." Ash took it. The paper felt light and almost useless in his hand. Byron's voice dropped even lower. "But I'm afraid you're barred from this hall. Daniel's authority is final here. You can keep the provisional tag, for now. Just don't come back inside." Massimo said nothing. He simply watched Ash with the same cold distance he had shown since the crystal revealed the class. Daniel had already turned away, returning to his table as if the matter were settled. A few adventurers still stared. Most had gone back to their drinks, though the low murmur of conversation now carried a different edge, curiosity mixed with open wariness. Ash stood there for another second, the pamphlet in one hand and the bronze token in the other. The weight of every eye in the room pressed against his back the same way it had in Fairhaven. Barred again, but this time with the pleasure of not knowing anyone. He turned without another word and walked toward the heavy double doors. No one stopped him. No one offered a different opinion. The sound of his boots on the stone floor was the only thing that marked his exit. Outside, the afternoon light felt too bright after the dim hall. Ash paused at the top of the steps and looked down at the pamphlet. The title was simple: Guidelines for New Adventurers, Empire of the Gate Worlds, Provisional Rank. He unfolded it once, then closed it again. The words would have to wait. Right now, he needed somewhere quiet to think, somewhere that would not immediately throw him out for the class the system had forced on him. 4 gold coins, a barred guild tag, a class no one wanted near them, and a planet he apparently would never leave. Ash started down the steps, the unease of Millbrook settling deeper into his bones with every step. He needed a place to stay. There were several inns clustered near the guild hall, wooden signs hanging over doorways, the smell of cooking food drifting out onto the street. Ash considered them for only a moment before deciding against it. Too close. The chance of running into Daniel or Massimo again was higher than he wanted to risk. One confrontation in a single day was already more than enough. He kept walking, putting distance between himself and the tall Gothic building. As he moved deeper into the town, he began cataloging the businesses he passed. A floral shop with baskets of bright blooms set out on the walkway. Next to it, a blacksmith's forge, sparks visible through the open front, the steady ring of hammer on metal carrying into the street. A leather worker's stall displayed belts, sheaths, and reinforced bags. Across the way, a clothing shop showed simple tunics and travel cloaks in the window. Several small restaurants had tables set outside, a few patrons already eating early meals. Further down, the street opened toward the river. There, standing larger than the surrounding buildings, was a general store. It was an ornate structure of dark wood and stone, its facade decorated with carved river motifs. A wide loading deck extended out over the water, and a large boat was currently tied up alongside it. Workers moved back and forth, unloading crates and barrels under the supervision of a man with a ledger. The whole operation looked busy and well organized. Ash slowed for a moment, watching the shipment come ashore. The general store would almost certainly have supplies he might need later: rations, basic gear, maybe even a map of the surrounding area. But first, he needed a room and a chance to sit down without being stared at. He continued past the riverfront store, looking for an inn that sat far enough from the guild hall to give him some breathing room. Then he stopped and turned back toward the general store. It was several blocks away from the guild hall. Word of his class probably hadn't reached this far yet. By nightfall, that would change. News like "Cleric of Murder" traveled fast in a town this size, but right now he still had a narrow window. His clothes were another problem. The sleeve was torn and stiff with dried blood. The rest of his outfit was scuffed and travel-worn. Anyone who had seen him at the guild hall would recognize him instantly if he kept wearing the same things. Ash adjusted the strap of his backpack and headed inside. The interior of the general store was larger than it looked from the street. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from dried food and rope to basic tools and folded clothing. The air smelled of wood, river water, and the faint metallic tang of newly delivered goods. A few customers browsed the aisles, but none of them paid him any special attention yet. He made his way toward the clothing section first, keeping his head down. Ash ran his hands over the fabric of several cloaks and tunics, testing the weave and thickness. He wanted something that would last. Durability mattered more than looks, now that he had no reliable party and no guaranteed income. A black cloak with even a light durability enchantment would have been ideal. He found a few hanging near the back. The price tags made him stop. 10 gold. Shit, he muttered under his breath. 10 gold was more than twice everything he had. There was no point even asking. He settled for the next best option, a thick, unenchanted hooded cloak in solid black, along with a plain black tunic and matching pants. Sturdy enough for travel, dark enough to help him stay less noticeable, and, most importantly, within reach of his remaining coin. He carried the items to the counter. The clerk was a middle-aged woman with ink-stained fingers and a no-nonsense expression. She looked up from a ledger as he approached. "These three," Ash said, setting the cloak, tunic, and pants on the polished wood. "How much?" She examined each piece briefly, then named a price that was already higher than he expected. 25 silver for the lot. Ash frowned. That's steep for unenchanted travel clothes. The stitching on the cloak is uneven near the hem, and the tunic's a standard cut. 15 silver seems more reasonable. The woman gave him a flat look. 25. He tried again, keeping his tone polite. "I've got limited coin. I'm not looking for anything fancy, just something durable that'll hold up on the road. 20? A system notification flickered at the edge of his vision. Social penalty. Class, cleric of murder. Negative modifier applied to commercial interactions. Final price adjusted. The clerk's expression didn't change, but her next words came without hesitation. 20 silver. Final offer. Take it or leave it. Ash clenched his jaw. He had felt the shift the moment the notification appeared. Whatever quiet pressure his class exerted on people, it was already working against him. Haggling further would only make it worse. He counted out the coins and pushed them across the counter. 20 silver. The woman accepted the payment, wrapped the clothes in plain brown paper, and handed the bundle over without another word. "Do you know any inns further from the guild hall?" Ash asked before turning away. He kept his name to himself. Somewhere quiet. She considered him for a second, then gave a short nod. 2 streets over, toward the south wall, place called the River Rest. Clean enough. They don't ask many questions. Thanks. Ash left the store with the new clothes under his arm and 2 gold, 80 silver remaining in his pocket, already lighter than when he had walked in. The social penalty still lingered at the edge of his thoughts, a quiet reminder that even simple conversations were going to cost him more from now on. He followed the clerk's directions, cutting down a narrower side street that led toward the southern edge of town. The buildings here were older and less ornate, the river's presence stronger in the air. After 2 turns, he found the place. The River Rest was a 2-story building of weathered dark wood, with a simple painted sign hanging above the door. It looked modest compared to the inns near the guild hall. No elaborate carvings, no loud music spilling into the street. A few patrons sat at outdoor tables nursing drinks, but the overall atmosphere was quieter. Ash pushed the door open and stepped inside. The common room was warm and smelled of stew and wood smoke. A low fire burned in a stone hearth along one wall. A handful of people occupied the tables, none of them in adventuring gear. The innkeeper stood behind a short counter, wiping down a mug. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her 40s, with short-cropped hair and a practical apron. She looked up as Ash approached. "Need a room?" she asked. "Yes, just for the night, maybe longer." He kept his voice even and did not offer a name. "How much?" 8 silver a night, includes a simple meal. 10 if you want a private room with a lock. Ash considered the remaining coin in his pocket. Privacy felt worth the extra cost right now. "Private room," he said, counting out 10 silver. The innkeeper took the coins, produced a heavy iron key from under the counter, and slid it across to him. "Up the stairs, second door on the left. Stew's still hot if you want it now." I'll take it in the room, Ash said. She nodded, ladled a portion into a wooden bowl, and handed it over with a thick slice of bread. No further questions. No demand for a name or papers. Ash climbed the narrow stairs, found the indicated door, and locked it behind him. The room was small but clean. A single bed, a wooden table under a narrow window, and a wash basin in the corner. He set the bowl down, dropped his backpack, and finally allowed himself to sit. For the first time since stepping through the world gate, no one was staring at him. He unfolded the pamphlet Byron had given him and laid it on the table beside the cooling stew. Outside the window, the light was beginning to fade toward evening. Word of a cleric of murder would reach the rest of Millbrook soon enough. Tonight, at least, he had a locked door and a few hours of quiet. End of chapter 4.